Hey, this is Dew, and I'm going to do a long form review video of some books that I read in the last week or ish. and I'm not going to give too much of the synopsis. Those are really easy to find online. But I will just talk about my impressions of the book and, what I didn't like, if that's true, because wow, we shouldn't like everything about everything. Or what I really was able to enjoy. So I'll go in reverse order, more or less, of how I read them. What I've just finished, so present in my mind, is Good Dirt by Charmaine Wilkerson. This is my second Charmaine Wilkerson, and if you've watched any of my previous videos, particularly the one where I reviewed Good Dirt, this is Good Dirt, Black Cake, I really struggled. I did not like Black Cake at all. And it was one of those, the more I thought about it, the more I didn't like it. But I could say that it was very much a story. Like, I liked the idea of the story. It was a story that needed to be told, but I had a lot of issues as a reader interacting with Black Cake. I think in her sophomore, Charmaine Wilkerson tightened up some of the really, not bringing together plots, and even tried to do a little bit less, perhaps, definitely, in Good Dirt, and that served the story well. However, I'm still of the opinion she's trying to do too much. We have multiple points of view, but we have like half pages of a point of view, which really doesn't develop any complexity and multiple characters' points of view. It just is mentioning a name and giving a scenario that's really so generic that it isn't getting into different sort of perspectives and psychological constructs. And it's just because there's so much and not enough time, perhaps. And I don't know anyone who could do depth in that little of time, with the exception of someone like Claire Keegan comes to mind, right? Who can do anything in half of a page. Anyway, I really appreciated there is some stories of enslaved ancestors and their struggles and their triumphs and their love. Some love stories written by Ebby, who is more or less the main character, the one that shows up the most in all of these fragmented stories that Charmaine Wilkerson's doing. And I really appreciated those, and I liked access to those, and I would like more access to those stories in literature. But the characters and their struggles seemed trite, cliche, unsophisticated, and unreflective, much the same way the contemporary characters, most especially Ebby and her fiance who left her miserable because of some reasons that you will find out if you read the book and don't want a spoiler. I felt like that as well about the two siblings in Black Cake. So this book really didn't work for me. I'll try not to think about it too much, because I think if I think about it more like Black Cake, it'll work less. And I do just really want to thank Charmaine Wilkerson for giving access to lesser told stories, which are the stories of enslaved people triumphing, loving, journeying, and I also will give props to her exploration of upper class Black folks who also don't get very many stories told about them either. Other than that, I will pass this book along and only give my somewhat negative review that I just gave to the folks I'm passing it to if they ask, because I understand a lot of people like this book. People who passed this book to me said that they liked this book. So I don't want to hate on anyone's parade. You absolutely should like the books that you like for the reasons that you like, and allow me as an avid and extensive reader to not like books that I don't like for the reasons that I don't like them. That being said, another book that I found a lot of flaws with was Moonlight and the Pearler's Daughter by Lizzie Pook. I thought, like I often do when books don't rise to kind of complexity that I had hoped for them, that this would have been a fantastic young adult book. I think that if it would have been written a little bit more for young adult and marketed to a young adult audience, this heroine on her hero's journey as a historical figure, a feminist historical figure, would have really worked well. But as it did as an adult reader, I found situations in developing stories, such as the main character, whose name is Abby, I believe. Nope, that's Good Dirt. Whose name was, let me check, because my goodness, you just finish a book and you forget the main character's name. Maybe if we can all say Eliza. Yeah. Who is Eliza? I was rooting for Eliza, and I somewhat liked her, but when she, like, there were instances in the book when she's like, I can't travel alone, I need a man, and then the next page she just randomly runs into some man who is going to help her. It just didn't feel authentic, right? And I think that's just one of many examples. That being said, I really did like Lizzie Pook's development of the setting, and I am a setting galley, so for that reason alone, the development of the setting of Western Australia and was really, I think, really engaging for me, and I found it well done. I really liked how she spent a lot of time to really develop the setting as an important part of, like, you know, this hero's journey as this woman v nature, and humans v nature a lot of the time. The like romance pieces gag me with a spoon, but that's how I normally feel. And some of the dialogue wasn't so great, but her development of setting really worked for me. I also really appreciated her author's note and the research that she did. And I wanted to give her props for raising attention on the exploitation of the pearlers trade, and especially of this kind of industry and all industry through colonization of the indigenous peoples and other peoples, but especially the indigenous peoples, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. So if you kind of like not to, like, just page turner popcorn, you're not going to get upset with like what should have been a maybe more geared towards young adult developmental plot, I think that you could have a really good time with this book. And I was extra excited to find this book. We don't get too many Australian books in the US. This is a UK edition. Yeah, a Picador UK edition. So I'm happy that I found it, and I'm glad that I got to experience it for the setting and the historical aspects. But the plot, character development, not so great. We get to a book and I sighed that way that one sighs, because when they're reading, even though I'm going backwards, if you get a couple of not great reads, you start to be like, oh, am I slumping? Is it me? Am I reading too much? Is that why I'm not liking it? Am I overthinking? And then I got hit with The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I don't know if I can adequately summarize the impact that The Only Good Indians had on me while reading, and especially after reading. I have to say there's a great deal of bias that I have. I'm from the state of Montana, and his development of setting really worked for me as somebody from there. I absolutely just completely was in the setting, knew what was up, and felt really engaged in this book because of that. And I think I wonder if that's the same for folks who are from places that are written about more often or all of the time, right? Because we don't get small town Highline Montana written into very popular books very often. So if you are small town Highline Reservation Montana and any of the above, I think that this, like, just seeing yourself in the literature is perhaps fantastic, right? It was for me. His use of classic horror mechanisms to develop metaphor and symbolism, and really drive home the themes of this book. I mean, I always say I'm not a horror person, and then I read a book like this, and I really did kind of have to fall out in some of the more graphic scenes, because that doesn't work for me. But what pulled me back in was just, again, those mechanisms that horror can get to, that can really get to as a deep exploration and or criticism. And I think Stephen Graham Jones nailed it. I also think that if you wanted to just read this book as a kind of like romp through a horror story, it works. I think if you are from Montana, it's going to work even more because there's so many nuances that you're just going to get. But I also think if you're someone who just wants to keep thinking about a book after you set it down, this is the book for you. I couldn't thank Stephen Graham Jones enough for creating this book. I have a couple of friends who want to borrow from me, and although I always say that I 100% on haul, I will let it go if they're going to keep it and just wait for another copy to come back to me. But if they return it to me, I will hold on to it and keep passing it on to select people who I think that would really enjoy this book. Old Filth by Jane Gardam. I enjoyed this book. Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I was like, what in the heck is going on? I feel like something's going on and I'm not quite getting it. And it was a little bit about the banter and the yickety yak of these sort of like elderly upper class British folk who are chatting about in this book. And I thought some of it, I'm like, I know that there's something here to get and I didn't quite get. So that happened for me in a reader, but what I definitely got was that Jane Gardam's craft was just spot on. And if I wanted to just maybe even slow down a little, I could get a little bit more. What I definitely took home from this book was loneliness. I could feel it was harrowing how well Jane Gardam made me sympathize and empathize with Old Filth, the main character, in his loneliness. There's a lot of sharp social criticism about colonization, about actually family separation, about loss, about expectations, about legacy. Like, this is jam-packed with chitter chatter, bitter better. Like, I think this is how I'm gonna explain it. And then inside of it is tucked in all of this really dense commentary and reflection. This is the first book of a trilogy. I happen to own the second book, and I don't know because I've never done my TBRs. I am reading series. So this is the third series I've started. Harlem Shuffle, My Brilliant Friend, and now Old Filth are all the first book in trilogies or quartets. And I plan to read the second book of this. It's going to be, I think what Jane Gardam's doing is it's going to be one of the other side characters. I think we've wrapped up Old Filth, but we meet, this is a lot of character study in this, like in My Brilliant Friend. So we're going to meet one of the other characters mentioned. I imagine one of the other, they're called Raj orphans. They're orphans who were born somewhere in the empire, in one of the colonies in the empire, and then in their like preteens sent back to England to learn the language and their customs or be enculturated or whatever. So separated from their family and sent to live with either distant family or in foster homes. So we meet several folks that happen to, and I think in maybe in the sequels we're going to meet some of the other ones. There's going to be more focus on some of the other ones, kind of like what Elizabeth Strout does, but that's just me speculating. We'll see on the review. I recommend this book. If you're a lit fic lover and you like English literature, I recommend this book. Cantica by Elizabeth Graver. Cantica means song in Ladino, and Ladino is a dialect of Sephardic Jews. I think what I can say about this book and its lovely inclusion of pictures of real people. So this isn't really like an auto fiction, but it is this author, Elizabeth Graver, looking at the story of her grandmother and then kind of tracing it back through multiple generations. The book starts in 1907. So not necessarily multiple generations, the grandmother from the beginning of her life through multiple decades. So it starts in 1907 in what is known then as Constantinople. And then there's an expulsion. And the folks living in Constantinople were expelled from Spain during the Inquisition. Constantinople, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, becomes Istanbul, and Turkey treats Jewish folks differently than their lives are different than they were in the Ottoman Empire. So they flee across the globe, and we follow this expulsions and traveling and this dysphoria in Cuba, the US, and Spain mostly. I take some issue, like I'll give you an example. What Elizabeth, that's the name of the author. The grandma's name is Rebecca. Several times through several moments in her life, Rebecca has inner commentary about, no, there's a description of the author, a third person commentary about Elizabeth's weight and body shape. And it adds nothing. And where it probably could be authentic, like women think like that, I don't know if it bothered me that we can't get over that it needs to be added into novels. Like I felt like it didn't add anything. And in fact, I noticed it enough that it annoyed me. One small example of just little things that didn't quite work for me in this. However, for this story, this song, it wanted and needed to be told, and I'm so glad it did. So I can thank Elizabeth Graver for teaching me a lot of things and helping me reflect on a lot of things about Sephardic Judaism, the Sephardic Jewish people, and also expulsions and refugeeism, and having to resettle and live without family and have family become ill and die when you can't get to them, etc. It really did, without being didactic, it did teach a lot. Long Live the Post-Harem by Vigdis Hjorth, translated from the Norwegian by Charlotte, I think it's Barslund. Yeah, okay. The description of this book is, it's an existential scream. It starts with a Kierkegaard quote about the the post horn. And I think that that's relevant because I haven't read the extensive text of this Kierkegaard quote. It's relevant because the story, the plot of this revolves around the postal union and a movement of the Norwegian Postal Service to keep their services the way that they are. I liked learning a little bit about how the European political structure is working as far as the EU and individual countries such as Norway. I loved hearing about like the concerns of the really rural places in Norway that the Postal Service was, in the book, so is, able to give access to the world through their services. This is extremely, when it says it's an existential scream, that's exactly what it is. It is a lot of inner existential, extremely stream of consciousness, we'll say, existential dialogue to the extreme. And sometimes I just wanted to scream. I really appreciate the prose of this book, even in its translation. And I will definitely be interested in reading Will and Testament. But this book, honestly, was a bit of a struggle because of just I think you have to be in the mood to just sit down with a little pocketbook of existential scream. So if you're ever in the mood for that, pick up this book. Lastly, I read The Furrows by Namwali Serapel. In this book, as well as Black Dirt, as well as The Only Good Indians, as well as Old Filth, as well as Cantica, all of them. All of the books that I just talked about, they grapple with grief. Grief is a ubiquitous human experience, and one that needs to be grappled with all of the time. Long Live the Post-Horn as well. Grief is one of its main concentrations, one of the main things it contemplates. The Furrows, to an extreme, like the whole point of The Furrows is to grapple with grief, loss, and trauma, and what that does, especially to memory, but also to family and belonging. Good Dirt also kind of in similar ways, but this is way more in depth. I'm sorry, I said Good Dirt, I meant Moonlight and the Pearler's Daughter. In both stories, there's a drowning of a younger sibling. And so there's a real grappling, a real struggling to come to terms with and to live with and to bury or to accept or to heal from it in both of these stories, in this book and in this book, in much different ways. I think that Namwali Serpell's maybe writing, the prose, the craft of writing was the most impressive of this book series that I'm talking about right now. I really found her craft awesome, like creating awe in me. I also didn't really like, she did this such deep dive into to grief, but the book still didn't, like, it didn't stick with me. It didn't stick to me. It didn't stick on me the way that for instance, The Only Good Indians did. So I feel like next year, if I try to recall what this book was about, I might be able to say maybe the theme, grief, but as was like every book. Every book in this pile was also about grief. So there was something just amiss. And I can't put my finger on it, but that's what I have to say. I also will say in the second half, because there are two halves of the book, and I was really glad that there was a second half, because by the end of the first half, I was like, I hope like we get a little bit of shift in this book. I wanted that, and thank you, Namwali. You did it. You shifted, and then we get to explore this other character. And I thought that it wasn't as well explored as the female character. And I also really, really want to agree with the critics who problematize that the behavior of this man and the way that the book tackles this behavior, which is stalking and lying and even predatorial. And I understand that both of these characters, like the point of both of these characters, that they're humans with struggles and damages that create situations where they get in unhealthy relationships. And that I get. However, I think it could have been, like, I hear the critics, because with the second half of the book, the male character's behavior could have been handled differently and not justified in any way, and or romanticized, which I'm not suggesting is happening in this book, but it didn't not do it. And I think that it maybe missed an opportunity. And I definitely hear the critics that really thought that it was beyond untoward. It was disturbing, the behavior of the male character who becomes the point of view in the second half of the book. I'm glad I read this book. It was one of those ones that was just a complete chance. I didn't know anything about it. I read a bit of the synopsis. I thought, why not? Let's give it a try. I definitely read somebody on the front gave it, or the back, I'm sorry, gave it a bit of a Kiran Desai. I don't know if that would have pushed me. I thought that it might have been a blurb too that was like, okay, let me give this a chance. So I'm glad that I did. I just, like I said, there's just something that's not going to make it stick. In fact, I think all 4 of these books were all chance givers, and I'm glad. I'm glad I still take chances as a reader, honestly. Let me see, of this pile, 1, 2, 3 were free, found at little free libraries or passed along. And then 4 were from, all 4 were actually from my friends at the library. So that's kind of what fueled this stack of reading, or this week in reading. And I definitely have others on the go. So next week-ish, I will do another reading review video. I do have one TBR planned. We'll see if I can get to it. If not, I'll see you in the review video.